August 4, 1943, RAF Dyce Airfield, Aberdeen, Scotland. A Focke-Wulf Fw-91, Nazi Germany's most advanced fighter aircraft, drops from the cloud layer at 300 feet. British gunners freeze. This shouldn't be happening. German fighters don't just land at Allied bases. The Fw-91's wheels touch down, the propeller windmills to a stop. Ground crew rushes forward, rifles raised. The canopy slides back. A young Luftwaffe pilot climbs out, hands raised, face pale. In broken English, he says, "I am surrender. I made mistake in navigation." What happens next changes the air war over Europe, because inside that fighter, sitting on a Scottish runway by accident, is technology the Allies have been desperately trying to understand. Technology that's been killing their pilots for 2 years. And the German pilot who delivered it? He would die never knowing that his mistake saved thousands of Allied lives and shortened the war by months. The Focke-Wulf Fw-91 first appeared in combat in September 1941 over northern France. British pilots reported an aircraft faster, more maneuverable, and more heavily armed than anything Germany had fielded before. It outclassed the Spitfire Mark V in virtually every category. Within months, Fw-91s established air superiority over the Channel. RAF losses climbed dramatically. Pilots who encountered the new fighter and survived described it in frightened terms. A beast, unkillable, something we can't match. British intelligence became obsessed with obtaining one intact. Crashed examples provided fragments, twisted metal, burned components, but nothing complete enough for comprehensive analysis. The Air Ministry issued a standing order. Capture an Fw-91 by any means necessary. Attempts were made. Commando raids on French airfields, offers of vast sums to potential defectors. None succeeded. The Germans guarded their prize jealously. Downed aircraft were destroyed by their pilots. Captured examples in occupied territory were booby-trapped or stripped of critical components before Allied forces arrived. By mid-1943, the Fw-91 remained a mystery. Allied engineers could theorize about its performance characteristics. They could measure them in combat. But they couldn't understand how Germany had achieved such a leap in capability. Without that understanding, countering it remained guesswork. The crisis reached its peak in early 1943. American bombers began daylight raids into Germany without fighter escort. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs capable of reaching Berlin didn't exist yet. B-17 and B-24 formations relied on defensive firepower alone. Fw-91s massacred them. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission in August 1943 would demonstrate the cost. 60 bombers lost out of 376 dispatched. 600 American airmen killed or captured in a single day. The Fw-91s slashed through the bomber formations, their advanced radial engines providing power and maneuverability that made them nearly unstoppable. RAF Fighter Command faced similar devastation. The introduction of the Spitfire Mark IX had partially addressed the imbalance, but the Fw-91 remained superior in several critical areas. British pilots rotated out of Channel patrols with shocking casualty rates. Some squadrons lost 50% of their pilots in 3 months. The technological gap was killing Allied airmen faster than they could be replaced. Allied intelligence knew the basics. The Fw-91 used a BMW 801 radial engine producing 1,700 horsepower. It featured wide-track landing gear that made carrier-like takeoffs possible. Its armament included 4 machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, devastating firepower concentrated in the wings. But they didn't know the details. The engine cooling system, the fuel injection design, the wing loading characteristics, the control harmonization that made it so responsive. Without captured examples to study, Allied engineers couldn't develop effective countermeasures. Senior RAF officers discussed the problem frankly. We're being outflown by an aircraft we don't understand. Until we understand it, we're losing this war in the air. Oberlieutenant Armin Faber was born March 24, 1920 in Westphalia, Germany. The son of a Lutheran pastor, he grew up in a conservative household that valued duty and service. His father served as an army chaplain in World War I and returned with both Iron Crosses and nightmares. Armin showed early aptitude for mechanics. As a teenager, he built radios and repaired neighbors' automobiles. In 1938, at age 18, he joined the Luftwaffe, not out of Nazi ideology, but from fascination with aviation. He wanted to fly. His training records described him as technically proficient but lacks situational awareness, a prophetic assessment. Faber flew Messerschmitt Bf 109s during the Battle of Britain in 1940. He scored 3 confirmed kills and earned the Iron Cross Second Class. His superiors noted his skill in dogfighting, but also documented several incidents where Faber became disoriented during combat and had to be talked back to base by radio. In early 1942, Faber transferred to Jagdgeschwader 2, Fighter Wing 2, stationed at Morlaix, Brigney. The unit converted to FW-91s. Faber loved the new fighter. Its power, its stability, its forgiving handling characteristics. He wrote to his father, "This aircraft makes me a better pilot than I am." By summer 1943, Faber had 11 confirmed victories. Not an ace, that required 15, but a competent, reliable pilot. His weakness remained navigation. He relied heavily on following his squadron leader. When separated, he struggled. There's no evidence Armin Faber underwent a moral transformation. He wasn't a resistor, wasn't secretly opposed to the Nazi regime. His letters home focused on flying, on camaraderie, on missing his family's Sunday dinners. But there are hints of discomfort. A letter from May 1943 found in his father's papers after the war. "Today we strafed a British convoy. I saw men jumping into the water, burning. I did my duty, but I wonder, do the British pilots feel the same when they bomb Hamburg? Do they think of us as humans or just targets?" Another letter, June 1943. "Father, you told me once about the war, about how you prayed for both sides because you couldn't see soldiers as enemies, only as sons. I'm beginning to understand what you meant. When I shoot down a Spitfire, I try not to think about the man inside, but sometimes I can't help it." Faber wasn't a hero of conscience, but he was a human being discovering the weight of killing other human beings. That humanity, that ordinary, unremarkable awareness that his enemies were people, makes what happens next almost tragically mundane. He wasn't fleeing evil. He just got lost. August 4, 1943, 14:30 hours. The mission brief was straightforward. Intercept American B-17 bombers returning from a raid on German industrial targets. Jagdgeschwader 2 scrambled 12 FW-91s from Morlaix. The interception went badly. The B-17s had strong fighter escort, Spitfire Mark 9s from RAF Fighter Command. The engagement dissolved into chaos, aircraft everywhere, tracer fire arcing across the sky, radio chatter overlapping into white noise. Faber pursued a Spitfire through a cloud bank, lost visual contact, emerged into clear sky, alone. No friendly aircraft visible, no landmarks he recognized. He checked his compass, checked his fuel, checked the position of the sun, made a decision. Fly north, return to French coast, follow coastline west to Brittany. It was the wrong decision. His compass had been damaged during the dogfight, possibly by vibration, possibly by a bullet strike too minor to notice. North was actually south. Faber was flying deeper into England. At 15:20 hours, he spotted a coastline. Relief flooded through him. Brittany. Home. Except it wasn't Brittany. It was Scotland. Faber descended, looking for his airfield, saw a runway, assumed it was Morlaix. The configuration looked right, single runway, dispersal areas, buildings. He entered the landing pattern, dropped flaps, lowered landing gear, touched down smoothly at 15:25 hours. As he taxied, he noticed the aircraft parked on the hardstands. They had RAF roundels. The realization hit him like physical impact. He just landed at an enemy airfield. There was no mercy in this story, only spectacular mistake. British ground crew swarmed the aircraft before Faber could apply throttle and take off again. Rifles pointed at the cockpit, shouted commands in English. Faber shut down the engine, raised his hands, climbed out. Wing Commander P.B. Laddie Lucas, station commander at RAF Dyce, arrived within minutes. He stared at the FW-190, pristine, undamaged, technology-rich, and couldn't believe what he was seeing.
"Do you speak English?" Lucas asked. "Little," Faber replied. "I make mistake. I think this France. This is Scotland." Faber's face drained of color. The enormity of his error crashed over him. He just delivered Germany's most advanced fighter to the enemy, intact, fueled, fully armed. Lucas later wrote, "I almost felt sorry for the poor bastard. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd walked off a cliff." British intelligence officers arrived within the hour. Faber was separated from his aircraft and taken into custody. He would spend the rest of the war in POW camps, comfortable but confined, while his mistake rewrote the air war. The FW-190 sat on the tarmac at RAF Dyce for exactly 4 hours before technical intelligence teams from the Royal Aircraft Establishment arrived. They swarmed it like archaeologists discovering an intact tomb. Every component was photographed, measured, analyzed. The BMW 801 radial engine was removed and shipped to Rolls-Royce for detailed examination. The wide-track landing gear, which had puzzled Allied designers, was tested repeatedly. The gun harmonization system was re-engineered. Most critically, test pilots flew it. Captain Eric Winkle Brown, the Royal Navy's chief test pilot, took the FW-190 up on August 8, 1943. His report revolutionized Allied fighter tactics. The FW-190 is superior to the Spitfire Mark V in all respects except turning radius. However, it has a critical weakness. The roll rate decreases dramatically above 400 miles per hour. Additionally, the radial engine's cooling is vulnerable to damage. Concentrated fire on the engine cowling will overheat the BMW 801 rapidly. This intelligence spread through RAF and USAA squadrons immediately. Tactics changed. Instead of trying to outturn the FW-190, impossible, Allied pilots learned to exploit its high-speed roll limitations. They learned where to aim to cripple the engine. Loss rates dropped within weeks. There was no final meeting. Faber never saw his aircraft again after that August afternoon. He was transferred from RAF Dyce to a POW interrogation center, then to permanent camps, first in England, then Canada. His interrogators found him cooperative, but devastated. "I have disgraced my unit. I have failed my comrades." The irony? By failing his comrades, he saved his enemies. British intelligence kept Faber's capture classified. If Germany learned the FW-190 had been compromised, they might modify future production or deploy new variants. Better to let the Luftwaffe continue using the same tactics, while Allied pilots exploited newly discovered weaknesses. Faber spent the war years in Camp 30, Bowmanville, Ontario, a privileged camp for German officers. Comfortable barracks, adequate food, recreational facilities. He worked in the camp library, taught mathematics to other prisoners, played chess. He never tried to escape. What was the point? Germany was losing. His mistake had contributed to that loss. He wrote letters to his father, censored, vague, saying he was well, he was safe, he hoped the war would end soon. Those letters never mentioned the FW-190, never mentioned August 4, 1943, never mentioned that his navigation error had altered the course of the air war. The FW-190's liberation was immediate. It belonged to the Allies the moment Faber lowered the landing gear at RAF Dyce. Within 6 months, every weakness discovered through testing was being exploited in combat. Allied fighter pilots received detailed briefings: roll at high speed to evade, aim for the engine cowling, force them into turning fights where we have advantage. More importantly, the captured FW-190 influenced Allied aircraft design. The Hawker Tempest, introduced in 1944, incorporated lessons learned from studying the German fighter. American designers used intelligence from the captured aircraft to improve the P-47 Thunderbolt and accelerate the development of the P-51D Mustang. The subject in this story wasn't a person. It was technology, and its liberation shortened the war. By 1944, the FW-190 was no longer dominant. Allied fighters matched or exceeded its capabilities. German pilots who once enjoyed superiority found themselves outclassed. The psychological impact was devastating. The Luftwaffe lost confidence. Some historians estimate that intelligence from the captured Fw-190 saved between 2,000 and 4,000 Allied aircrew lives by reducing loss rates. It's impossible to calculate precisely, but the impact was profound. Armin Faber was liberated from Camp 30 in May 1945. Germany had surrendered. The war was over. He returned to a devastated homeland. His reception in Germany was cold. Fellow Luftwaffe veterans viewed him as the man who betrayed the Fw-190. It didn't matter that it was an accident. It didn't matter that he'd been a competent pilot with 11 kills. He was the idiot who landed at an enemy airfield. Faber found work as a mechanic in Dortmund. Married in 1948, had 2 daughters, lived quietly, never discussing his wartime service. When asked, he'd say he'd been a fighter pilot, was shot down, spent the war in a POW camp. True, but incomplete. He didn't die dramatically, didn't waste away in guilt. He just lived, ordinary, unremarkable, haunted by a mistake that wouldn't leave him. In 1975, at age 55, Faber suffered a heart attack while working in his garage. He died before the ambulance arrived. At his funeral, his eldest daughter mentioned to a family friend that her father had been a Luftwaffe pilot. The friend, a British expatriate and aviation historian, asked, "What unit?" Jagdgeschwader 2. When? 1943. The historian paused, looked at the daughter. Was he the one who landed the Fw-190 at Dyce? She didn't know what he was talking about. Armin Faber received no recognition because there was nothing to recognize. He wasn't a hero, wasn't a resistor. He was a pilot who got lost and accidentally handed a strategic advantage to the enemy. But history hasn't forgotten him. In 1983, the RAF Museum at Hendon opened an exhibit on captured enemy aircraft. The centerpiece, a restored Fw-190A3, painted to match the markings of Faber's aircraft. A plaque explains what happened on August 4, 1943. It doesn't mock him, doesn't celebrate his error, simply states the facts. This aircraft landed at RAF Dyce due to navigational error by the pilot. Its capture provided critical intelligence that influenced Allied fighter tactics and aircraft design. In 2003, aviation historian Dan Sharp published The Last Flight, a detailed account of Faber's mistake and its consequences. The book treats Faber sympathetically, a competent pilot undone by a damaged compass and bad luck. Sharp interviewed Faber's daughters. They learned for the first time the full story of what their father did. One daughter, Greta, said, "I wish he'd known that his mistake, this thing he was ashamed of, actually saved lives. That would have meant something to him." But Armin Faber died in 1975, never knowing that Allied pilots briefed on Fw-190 weaknesses included the phrase, "Thanks to Faber's capture, we know," never knowing that aviation historians would call August 4, 1943, the luckiest intelligence coup of the air war. He died thinking he was the man who disgraced his unit. History remembers him as the man who accidentally shortened the war. There's a particular tragedy in accidents that become legends. Armin Faber didn't choose to defect, didn't consciously decide that Allied lives mattered more than German military secrecy. He simply got lost, compass damaged, landmarks unfamiliar, judgment clouded by combat stress and fuel anxiety, and that accident saved thousands of lives. It's tempting to find meaning in it, to suggest that fate or providence guided Faber to RAF Dyce that August afternoon, but the truth is simpler and more mundane. Sometimes the most consequential moments in history happen because someone makes a mistake. The power of one person's actions, even unintentional actions, can reshape events. Faber delivered technology that changed the air war, not because he wanted to, because he turned left when he should have turned right. The tragedy is that he died without knowing his impact, died carrying shame over an error that history would view as a gift. His daughters learned the truth decades too late to tell him, "You mattered, your mistake mattered, lives were saved." In the end, Armin Faber and his accidental prisoner, the Fw-190 sitting on a Scottish runway, represent one of war's strangest ironies, that the most devastating blow to German air superiority wasn't struck by a hero or a spy or a brilliant tactician. It was struck by a young pilot with a broken compass and poor navigation skills who landed at the wrong airfield on an ordinary August afternoon and changed everything.